Well, I think most of us have returned now from the breakout sessions. And I hope you really enjoyed learning more about the pathways and the policy labs in this second half of the streams. We now turn to our keynote speaker of today, Afton. We're very happy to have you with us. You work as an independent consultant in sustainable food systems transitions. And well, I don't have to say that it's right at the heart of what we are talking about here, these 2 days during the conference. And we are very interested to hear what kind of insights and messages you have for us. So the floor is yours. I will stop sharing this screen and please put up your slides. I'm sure you have slides.
No, actually, I'm just gonna speak and.
Okay, that's also fine. Then I would like to ask people to go into a speaker's view, right? So because then they will see you in full and not just as a small icon there on the right or left hand or whatever side of the screen. Yeah, so I will stop sharing and the floor is yours.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So hi everybody, my name is Afton Halloran and I work with intergovernmental, international and philanthropic organizations, as well as research institutions to facilitate the transition to more sustainable and healthy food systems. I also wear another hat, which is working as a researcher at the University of Copenhagen. And I've been involved in a number of different projects which are highly related to what we're talking about today. And these are such projects and programs as the Nordic Food Policy Lab, the WHO European Office for the Prevention of Non-Communicable Diseases, the Nordic Food Systems Transformation Dialogues, and the Food Planet Prize. So we often talk about the imperative and the urgency to change. And we all know this. We often talk about the goals and the missions and the endpoints, but we also need to understand the journey and what kinds of skills we will need to have as well and along the way. And this is what I want to talk to you about in my speech today, and also have a dialogue a little bit later when we reserve about 10 minutes for questions. Over the past decade, our scientific understanding of the peril of our food systems has become a lot clearer. And I'm sure you've all witnessed this evolution. The scientific evidence base is one thing, but human behavior is another. And this makes working with food systems transformations not so straightforward, and also at times really frustrating or difficult. So just think about it, what we've come to know as our own traditions and culture throughout Europe has evolved over time. Having such easy access to animal products or just wasting food without even thinking about it has only become to be in the past decades. So the fact that our culture evolves also means that change is possible, but heading in the right direction that we need to go, it won't necessarily be easy, and nobody is going to make that promise to you, and don't listen to them if they tell you it's going to be easy. Let me provide you with an example of what this kind of looks like on the ground. This year, the Danish government decided that 2 meals served in state canteens needed to be vegetarian. This was to set an example of green eating habits and reduce national greenhouse gas emissions. However, this decision was quickly met with criticism, and then the decision was quickly withdrawn. And the criticism came from all sides. Some said that we'd actually eat more meat in protest, while others said that the effect that this would have would be really small in comparison to the emissions associated with the country's large meat industry. And others saw the withdrawal of the decision actually as a missed opportunity on how to nudge human behavior. And in the end, the decision was left up to individual canteens to decide whether or not they wanted to actually implement these 2 vegetarian days a week. And no matter what you think, this example represents the polarity in our European society when it comes to dietary shifts, as well as the general transformation of the food system. This is why our society's ability to reach ambitious goals like the European Green Deal, the Farm to Fork Strategy, and the Sustainable Development Goals is actually dependent on our collective ability to address polarization. So what can we actually do about it? I want to draw on something that I find useful and fascinating. It's called deep democracy. Deep democracy, in essence, is an attitude that focuses on the awareness of voices that are both central and marginal. The fundamental principles and processes of the Lewis form of deep democracy grew out of the transition period during apartheid, when they were moving from apartheid to democracy in South Africa. So the development of this way of thinking has really nothing to do with food per se, but rather about societal transformation in general. And ultimately, this is what's happening right now as well. In this mindset, in the deep democracy mindset, we acknowledge that there's a wisdom in the no. And so in other words, this is something that we acknowledge that there is something to be learned even from the opposition. It recognizes that when different voices come into conversations and dialogues with each other, that there will inevitably be differences in opinion. And this is the gift of diversity, but it's also the challenge. In order to do our best to mitigate polarization in our society, we need to create safe spaces where alternative views can be held and discussed rather than marginalized. And this is something that we tried to do with the Nordic Food Systems Dialogues, where together with researchers from the Stockholm Resilience Center, we went to each and every one of the Nordic countries and started to basically launch some initial discussions around some changes in the food system, such as increasing legumes and nut consumption in the Nordic region, as well as reducing red meat consumption. So if we don't understand each other, it's easy to build walls, and it's easy to disregard the concerns of the other as less important or unimportant. We also start to place our issues above others when we take a mindset of seeing our issue as more important. And it's interesting because we often have a lot more in common than we think, which is basically ensuring a better life for future generations. If we do not understand and address differences in views, these bumps in the roads will actually turn into mountains over time. And as all of us are attending the Fit for Food conference today, we must recognize that we are facilitators of change processes. And this comes with a responsibility. One of these responsibilities is to leave no one behind. And I'm not just talking about paying lip service to a sustainable development slogan. I'm talking about what we're actually going to do about it. As we transform our subnational, national, European, and global food systems, we need to amplify the opportunities that come with this and reduce the barriers to change. In one portion of my research, I work a lot on understanding the adoption of new agricultural technologies. And it's well understood that a beef cattle farmer is not going to become a cricket farmer or a lentil farmer overnight. They need help to do that. It's easy to race ahead and focus on where we need to be in 2030 or even 2050. But fostering the emergence of a new system is often where the most energy and attention is. But at the same time, we also need to support the work of those of us who will help to extract everything that we learned in the old system and actually lay that old system to rest. And this is where translators, knowledge brokers, bridge builders, and all the other people who play a role in connecting different parts of the food system are going to come into the picture and why they're so important. Let me spell this out in another way. So maybe you've heard from my accent that I'm an adopted European. I grew up on beautiful Vancouver Island in Western Canada, and the Indigenous people of this region, whose traditional lands we occupy, are called the Coast Salish people. The Coast Salish people, they have a very rich culture, and especially when it comes to storytelling, they tell a lot of stories about shape-shifting animals. And one of these animals, and one of my favorite, is the raven. And the raven is a clever and resourceful animal. It can adapt to all sorts of different environments. and it can move between and interact with different worlds. Now, the raven, just like it does in the Coast Salish stories and also in other indigenous cultures in other parts of the world, the raven can teach us a valuable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. We have to ask ourselves the question, will our classic skills and competencies still work? Well, the short answer is no, or if the more complex answer is at least we're going to have to, train some of these certain muscles a lot more than we have in the past. And we'll also need to become shapeshifters like our friend the raven. But in order to do this, there are a number of skills that we can acquire and that we can build on. And I'm not going to talk to you about hard skills that are needed, but I'm going to walk you through just a very small number of the soft meta skills that are important to our work and important to addressing the challenges ahead in the food system. So the first that I want to talk about is introspection. This is basically the examination or observation of our own mental and emotional processes. And some of you might be thinking, oh, she's getting all emotional here, like, I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about the facts. But actually, this part is important because for me, the most challenging part of working with food systems is living with the tensions and the discomforts that often arise when we're engaging with the system, whether that's at a personal level or a societal level. At the personal level, adopting a reflective practice can help us overcome this discomfort. We do not learn from our experiences, but we learn from reflecting upon our own experiences. And if we don't give ourselves time for that, basically we're not enabling ourselves to embody that knowledge. In fact, being invited to give you this talk today has been an important opportunity for me to reflect on some of the parts of my journey through food systems transformation and acknowledging how much I've learned and how much I've grown and developed over the past decade, as well as how much the food system has actually transformed over that time as well. And at a systems level, introspection is incredibly important too. We will receive strong and weak forms of feedback as we work with different aspects of food. And it's what we do with this feedback that will play a role in determining the course of our journey. Another thing is anticipating and reacting to the nature and the speed of change. I'm sure you can all agree that things are happening pretty fast, and this can be overwhelming and in some cases paralyzing. This is where futures thinking can come in. Just look around you. Maybe you've noticed something different today, like a new urban garden plot that is showing up beside your apartment, or a sustainable option on the menu of your favorite restaurant. If these signals of change occur multiple times, they form patterns. And as patterns take shape, we start to gain new insight into where we might be headed in the future. And if these patterns repeat over a long enough period of time, we call them trends. And as trends play out over time, they transform society. So why is this important? Well, futures thinking is a method of informed reflection on the major changes that will occur in the coming decades in all areas of our society. And to become future-oriented thinkers, we must exercise our future consciousness muscles, which are a set of psychological capabilities that I've been referring to that include foresight, planning, goal setting, and purposeful behavior. These capacities enable us to communicate, participate in, and lead transformation processes in practical and both effective ways. History can also remind us that the future is multi-directional. There is no single path towards the future. But if we wish to actually improve the future, it's important to understand the possible directions that it might take, which is anticipation, and how to influence them, which is basically reaction or interaction. So the next thing I want to talk about is compassion and empathy. When I was a kid, my dad was laid off because the forestry sector that he worked in had transformed so fast that many of the mills that sawed the timber were no longer needed because another country could do it for cheaper. From a young age and firsthand, I came to learn how this kind of transformation affects our lives on a very personal level, and it wasn't easy. And when we talk about food systems, we have to remember that food systems are made up of people whose livelihoods and lifestyles are intertwined with the food system. This means that we will need to help others to reskill and adapt, not only ourselves, but also other parts of society who are more vulnerable to change. We also need to understand that changes like dietary changes or agricultural production systems, like I talked about before, are not going to happen overnight. Compassion and empathy are needed to be coupled with support mechanisms that assist people in reskilling and basically giving them the chance to benefit from the opportunities that change processes can and will present. And emergent change, let's talk about that. We often think that a true leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. But in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, who actually knows the right way towards 2030 and 2050? If we knew that, we wouldn't be having this conference. In unprecedented situations, what will this kind of change, emergent change, look like? Emergent change is important because it works with the collective intelligence of the system. In emergent change, you focus on hotspots and carefully target where you need to go. This means that you don't do the same thing in all places at the same time. Emergent change is not about bringing fixed long-term answers, but instead, basically what you're doing is you're testing and continually iterating partially formed solutions. For me, working with systems change is like a road trip without a map. There will be moments where we explore new and exciting destinations and make new discoveries, but there will also be those moments where we go off course and we need to make a U-turn to get back on track. And the last thing that I want to talk about is communication. In a transdisciplinary world, we work a lot with different domains and disciplines and capacities. And as you know, a lot of things can be lost in translation. Every day, I shift between different teams working on innovation, health, policy, environmental impact, sometimes all of these things at the same time. And I intentionally try to calibrate myself with the people that I'm interacting with. This means that I ask a lot of questions to be sure that everything is clear. For the younger generations represented in this conference, we often feel that asking questions is a sign of inexperience. We need to change this notion because without establishing a common understanding, we may fail to bring newcomers on board in the process. Listening is also a part of communication. And you might say, yeah, okay, Afton, thanks a lot. I'm not a child. You don't need to tell me what I need to listen to. But it's interesting because in reality, it's the most dominant voices and the ones that are most extreme that catch our attention. We often overlook the more nuanced conversations that are happening around us. It's like adjusting your FM, an old FM radio, and basically tuning in better to ensure that we hear these alternative and more nuanced views. So a portion of my work has been in Eastern and Western Africa. And the Hausa people of West Africa, they have this saying that I really like. And it says that when the music changes, so must the dance. And I want to build on this proverb to say that we need to emphasize that we are not dancing alone in the work that we do. This is a societal dance. And basically, we're going to need to dance at the same rhythm. This means that we not only need to build on these meta skills on the individual level, but also on institutional and societal levels. So with less than 1 year to go before the UN Food Systems Summit, there are many, many, many things that need to be done. But however, the overarching task in my mind needs to be taking systems thinking into systems doing. And since you made it to this conference and you're engaged in the FIT4FOOD2030 project in one way or another, I know that you can agree with me that conceptualizing and theorizing about how to change systems is not going to be enough. We'll need to actually put on our boots and put them on the ground and test things out. And in the world of innovation, entrepreneurship and the word iteration is a key term and also a mindset. And this is what we need to do if we're actually to find new ways to address global challenges like inequality and climate change, the things that we face together as a society. being able to contribute to and understand the scientific evidence while at the same time contributing to the implementation of this knowledge on the ground, for me, is what transdisciplinarity is all about. And just how one plant can pollinate another plant, plant of another variety, we need to facilitate the cross-pollination of ideas. History tells us that this is how we transform society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Afton. It's you were talking about compassion and empathy, and also, I think, I would say passion. It's clearly what you also conveyed as a message in your presentation. I thought it was very interesting and inspiring, touching upon so many of the very important issues we have been talking about, but repacking it and also, I would say, looking very much on how to support those who might be not automatically see the benefit in this transition and see how they can be overcome. And I saw a few questions passing by, so I would like to pose them to you. One of them is, you clearly mentioned deep democracy as a way to overcome actually what you call deep polarization. That might be a polarization. Some of the polarization might be very deep, deep polarization. How are your ideas on how deep democracy can overcome deep polarization?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think here, this is the importance of dialogue processes. And I know many of you are engaged with those, as actually, rather than thinking that everyone understands the science and that everybody is basically on the same page in the direction that we need to go, we also need to understand that there is opposition to that. There is misinformation. There are other things that are much deeper. So kind of, as we see it, as we talk about it often, is seeing it as an iceberg, but we often talk about the tip of the iceberg, right? So actually going much deeper and facilitating those processes. So this is where facilitation skills come in very, very handy. And this is where professional facilitation is also, I think, a key, something that needs to be included more in projects, because oftentimes we need to take a more neutral perspective. And in the work that we do, because we're talking about food, it's hard to be neutral because we all have an opinion about it. We all eat, and that makes it difficult. So I think that's where a kind of professional assistance can come in. So deep democracy basically has not necessarily been taken to the world of food yet, which is very interesting. It's more on the, when you were talking about personal conflicts in workplaces. But what I would like to see is that we actually learn from this process, and I would, advise everyone to look into the Lewis style of deep democracy, learn more about it, because there you can see that basically these are skills that we have to work very hard on and be very conscious of. So I think that self-awareness plays into this as well. And this is something we often, acknowledging our own biases, acknowledging basically how we interact with different audiences of people. That's something that I always remember as, someone who has a high education, who has a PhD, that, often if I'm interacting with someone who has only completed, let's say, a secondary school, that they perceive me in a different way, and that they might be resistant to the changes that I'm suggesting simply because I have a higher level of education. That comes down to other issues in society as well, which are concerning inequality.
Yeah, and very much in line with this, because somehow your talk inspired the word deep in people. So we also have seen a question around deep dialogues. Joao Leite asked, as we all become aware of the counterintuitive functioning of system thinking on a complex world, and how important system thinking is to improve our understanding and support the deep dialogues, are we failing at educational level as part of national strategies to prepare better future generations? And I would very much like to because you address that, actually you would say, yes, I know the answer, yet you give yes. So now the interesting thing becomes the how.
Yeah. This is a great question. And of course, well, there are many changes that will need to happen. Let me focus on a few. I think it's actually like ingraining and entrenching some of the skills that I talked about in education, because we often talk about the hard skills, and it's about, okay, learning to be a better, better analyst of data, or modeling better, or that is important. But also at the same time, we also have to build on these soft skills, and actually make a concerted effort to do so. And I think here is where the exposure in, let's say, in a university context, the exposure to transdisciplinary approaches, to exposure to systems thinking.
Oops. So sorry, Afton, we lost you a minute.
Oh, sorry. So I was just saying that basically this kinds of mindsets and paradigms, we need to talk about that at the bachelor's level, and even in high schools, we need to talk about this even with younger children. We can do that in different ways. But I think here we can't just wait until we get into the workplace and realize that we're dealing with complex systems and then try to figure that out. This needs to we need a kind of societal conversion towards this new mindset and paradigm.
Yeah. Elsa, as well, I have a question from Elsa Alvas, and I would like to take this as the last question. Apart from words of praise and admiration for your presentation, she asked, are we going on the way that we can break the wall to meet together and solve citizens' demands?
Yes.
Well, nice last question, isn't it?
Very nice, just an easy one. Easy one. Well, I mean, that would, I guess the first step is actually starting to create the spaces where we can interact. And I know that all of you who are participating today have been engaged in some form of, process. So creating, as I said in my talk, creating these safe spaces, the places where people actually want to convene and where they feel safe in voicing another opinion. And that in itself is will look different in different places because we all come from different cultures. So, I mean, yes, they will, again, I think someone said the people will always be ahead of policy, but we have to put the people back into all of the processes that we do. And remember, as I said, that people are part of systems.
Yeah. And I think one of the words that you used is that we need shapeshifters. Yeah, people are the shapeshifters. They are the ones that have agency and the possibility to do it. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Esther, for this
inspiring
presentation.